Okay, Robin Hood, 1973, directed by Wolfgang Reitherman, starring the voices of Brian Bedford, Monica Evans, Phil Harris, Roger Miller, Peter Ustinov, Terry Thomas, Pat Buttram. Just a great, wow, just a who's who of voice work. Jonny, I'm not sure, like, special doesn't do it justice. But our special guest is, let me see, I want to make sure he's an artist, he's an animator, he's a screenwriter, he's a film director, and he's a voice actor, just to name a very few of his talents. Mr. Stephen J. Anderson, how are you doing, sir?
Hey guys, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me. It's really good to be here.
We were talking a little before, this is crazy. Like, Twitter can be like, again, I like to call it a cesspool, but every now and then I make connections that I just can't believe. Like, obviously I've got friends and peers, but to be able to chat with somebody, as the director of Meet the Robinsons, the director of the 2011 Winnie the Pooh, as supervising director on Monsters at Work, someone who's worked on like Tarzan and Emperor's New Groove and Brother Bear. It's crazy that I could be watching these movies and then meet you through Twitter and become friends with you through Twitter and just asking you, hey, would you like to be on our podcast? And having you say yes, it's just like a whirlwind. I'm just not sure.
Hey, just so you know, Stephen, Darin usually just sends texts when he tells me who our guest is going to be or whatever. But he called me this time. He's like, I had to call you and tell you who's going to be on. It's going to be Meet the Robinson director. It's going to be great. So he was super excited, so you know.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, that was after I ran through the neighborhood screaming, like, guess is on a podcast. We were like, go back to bed. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so just to kind of take what would be the best? Do we call you Steven? Do we call you Steve? Do we call you Mr. Anderson, like Agent Smith in The Matrix?
Yeah.
I mean, what would be best?
I'm good with Steve. I use Steven for my credit,
Okay.
just to be fancy, but I like to just be called Steve.
Steve. Okay. Jonny, we are officially on a first name basis with a major filmmaker. I just wanted to say that. Okay, so again, I think just to recap a little bit, I think I met you or got to be friendly with you or familiar with Stanford and Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think Stanford had you on his Movies Past and Present, where he did an interview with you. Rachel did the Rotoscopers interview with you when you were, I think it was the day before Monsters at Work debuted on Disney Plus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you also guested on their Talking Disney, where you ranked your favorite Disney movies. And again, I gotta say, it was awesome. Just list like you didn't have anything past like what 1986 on your list, and
Yeah.
a lot of people will look at that and say, well, how come does he have something against the new stuff? But what I really appreciated is that your knowledge of animation and your appreciation for all the things that they did with Cinderella and Peter Pan, all those 50s movies, and just being able to hear you talk about, the artistry of that and how much you appreciated the animation. That's something that a lot of people don't focus on. I mean, and I know you said something about, well, people are going to knock me for not having like any new movies in there, but what do you think, like, your connection to Disney? Why is it those older movies? What is it about those that connects you emotionally, or you connect to emotionally more than any others?
I mean, I think ultimately those are the ones that I grew up with. Those are the ones that made me fall in love with animation, that made me fall in love with Disney, that made me fall in love with just movies in general.
Yeah.
The Walt era films, even though I wasn't born when Walt was alive, they were constantly being reissued when I was a kid. Like every 7 years, they would, reissue one of those movies in the theater. And as much as possible, I would get my folks to go take me to see them, or we go to the drive-in movie theater and see them. And those were the ones that that's what I saw. Therefore, that's what connected with me. And then as cheesy as some of the, the 70s and the early 80s movies were, that was also my childhood. That was the new stuff that was being made when I was a kid. So I connected with that, even though, just for some of them better for worse, some of them, aren't as great of movies, but I connected with them and I loved them. And so it's not that I don't have anything against the later movies, like the post 1986, let's say, Great Mouse Detective movies. It's just that I connected with those movies on a different level because I was 16 when Great Mouse Detective came out. 1988 was my first year at Cal Arts when I was studying animation, and that was Oliver and Company. So I saw Oliver and Company in a much different place because I'd already had about, I don't know, 4 or 5 months of Cal Arts. And then all the subsequent movies up until Lion King were all a combination of me as a student and then me getting into the industry, the first few years of me working, not at Disney yet. So I was looking at them in with much different eyes, not just the the wonder and the awe and my imagination exploding like I did with the movies I grew up with. These were they were new. They were new people that I was learning what their work was. Glenn Keane and Mark Henn and Eric Goldberg and Nick Raniere and all those, like the new batch of animators. I was looking at them as an animation student, so I was analyzing them, totally different eyes. And then once Pocahontas hit, I started at Disney the Monday after the Pocahontas wrap party. So everything after that was like also a totally different Disney because I was there. So I was also looking at them with even, totally different eyes because now I was part of it. And I was, learning what it is to make them and what goes into it, and meeting the people that were making them in the moment, like passing them in the halls, and the movies were being made right in front of me. So it's like in my life, I feel like there's 5 or 6 different Disneys that I've grown up with or that I've lived with, and they all kind of have a different connotation. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of a weird way to look at it, but so I guess that's why I didn't have anything past Great Mouse, just because when you talk about movies that I connected with on a real emotional level, it was the stuff before I really had a connection to animation, be it Cal Arts, be it working in the industry. Like that was all the stuff that motivated me and excited me, and like I said, captured my imagination. So I think that's why I chose those. Long-winded answer.
No, that's great. I mean, it's we all get addicted to Disney in our own ways, whether it's through our family or whether it's on our own. Like me personally, and I think I've said this on our podcast before, is that I was like growing up, my mom never showed me Disney cartoons. Like I didn't grow up on them. And so all I knew of Disney was the 70s output and 101 Dalmatians and Jungle Book. And I don't know, maybe it was like the age that I hit that I wasn't impressed by any of that. And so I just didn't want to have anything to do with Disney. And then just one day in 1990, I believe, I was visiting my family in New York, and my aunt had a VHS copy of a movie called The Little Mermaid. And I'd heard about it, and I was like, oh, I know it's a princess movie. I'm too cool for this, but let's go ahead and let me just see what the first 5 minutes were like. And just the first bars of, the Alan Menken score, I was hooked. And I couldn't figure out. It's just, I think it was, I'm not sure what it was. It was just, it just hit me in the right way, that it seemed more, because again, the thing with The Little Mermaid is it hit modern. Like it's had a new sound, it had a new feel. And I think I got into that. And that's when I was like, and especially when Eric shoves the boat, the bowsprit through Ursula, right? And I was like, as a teenager, I was like, that's cool. You know what I mean? So that hooked me. And so from then I was like, well, let me watch Beauty and the Beast. And I started doing all these things. Then during the 90s, when Jonny and I started getting hooked on movies, that's when I started deep diving into all the Disney, like from the very beginning. And so even though I got hooked on Little Mermaid, I mean, Sleeping Beauty is my favorite Disney movie of all time. Pinocchio is up there. Bambi is up there. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is up there, just because of the way that they set the standard. You know what I mean? Like the animation. Again, hearing you talk about Cinderella and like the scope of like the Lady Tremaine's her house, or the castle and things like that. It's just, that's the kind of stuff. I'm like, yes, that's the thing that a lot of people don't really attach themselves to. But I appreciate the art that went in it, and all the the spit and the grime and everything, and all the hard work. And so I think that's, I don't know, I think we kind of take it for granted. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sometimes it feels like there's filmmaking and cinema and all that stuff, and then there's the Disney movies, and they do actually cross over. Like those Disney films, classic Disney films, modern Disney films, there's real filmmaking, real cinema in there. And yeah, things like Cinderella, for example, that just knocks my socks off when you look at it. And see what they're doing with shape and color and line,
Yeah.
and just the storytelling is amazing.
And sometimes I think we take that for granted because we're more focused on story, saying we don't realize,
Mm-hmm.
again, Cinderella changing into her, her ball gown. I mean, that's the animation, and what when it's like was groundbreaking, and how they were able, but we don't really, we just, as a kid, well, that was kind of cool. We don't really go into the, and so I get, we all have different connections. I just think that's really interesting. What about you, John? I mean, what's your connection to Disney, and what's your phase that addicted you?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm addicted, but I did grow up with it. I mean, I watched all the Bambi and Dumbo, and Robin Hood, which we're going to talk about. But yeah, I grew up with those movies. And then when the 90s came out with Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and Lion King, and that's when it really kind of, I got more involved with it, or more excited about them. But I have 5 kids, and so we watch everything. I see all the animated movies, and yeah, we just barely watched Robin Hood for this tonight. But Stephen, look, I want to ask you a question. You kind of touched on it a little bit about how you got started in the industry. I used to work in film, and I actually knew a pretty well-known cinematographer in the industry, and so he gave me a little recommendation to kind of get my foot in the door. Did anybody kind of help you get into Disney when you first started? How did you actually get to work at Disney?
Yeah. So when I left CalArts, I worked at a studio called Hyperion Animation for about 4 years, doing lots of different things. It was a small studio. So I was an animator. I did storyboarding. I did some directing, and quite a few big heavy hitters in the animation world came through that studio. 2 of which were named Kevin Lima and Chris Buck. Now, Chris Buck was my animation teacher at CalArts, so I already knew Chris. But then I met Kevin there at the studio, and Kevin was developing another feature. I was animating on a film called Bebe's Kids, and Hyperion was really gearing themselves up to do just to be a feature animation studio. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out, but at the time he was developing a feature that he was going to direct. And he brought Chris Buck into the studio to be the animation supervisor on that. So I worked on that. I kind of I animated my day job, but I also sort of had a foot in that because I really wanted to get into story, and Kevin was encouraging me to do that. Ultimately, none of that happened. Kevin Lima left, went on to do this movie called The Goofy Movie. You may have heard of it. And then Chris Buck went back to Disney as an animator, was working on Pocahontas, and as a supervising animator. But then the 2 of them came together and were going to direct Tarzan. So with their recommendation, they encouraged me to come over to Disney, come do story on Tarzan. And I am forever grateful to both of them because on their recommendation, I was able to get in.
So Tarzan was the first movie you worked on?
What's that?
Was Tarzan the first movie?
It was, yeah. Tarzan was my first movie there at Disney. I was on it for about 3 years as a story artist. It was a pretty great movie to be my first one on, because it was pretty. I mean, it went through a lot of growing pains, and it took a while to crack the story. To be honest, we went through a lot of different versions, but boy, so proud of having to been able to be a part of that movie. It was just a real honor.
Yeah, I remember Tarzan not trying to, I mean, when the Renaissance started, they started really strong. And then I think Pocahontas, they kind of, reputation wise, they kind of slipped with that, and Hunchback. So it was hard for them to, I don't want to say it was a slip, but they had to kind of climb back up. And you had Hercules, you had Mulan, which kind of did, and Tarzan was just a really strong kind of way to cap off that decade. I don't want to say Mulan and Hercules are weak films, but compared to the beginning, you could tell, and Tarzan just came in. Just a question on that is Tarzan seems so effortless. It just seemed like every choice that they make was that, yeah, why wouldn't you do that? Was there a particular thing that made it so hard to crack and took 3 years to get to that form? Was there a particular issue?
Trying to remember back. I remember there was for the first few versions, I don't think they were ever storyboarded, but in the script phase, Act 3 actually took place back in England. So that was a big thing to never actually leave the jungle.
Yeah.
It sounds like a simple thing, but it sort of changed it. It really changed the movie, because I do remember Chris and Kevin talking about how, we're creating this really amazing jungle in animation, this Disney jungle that's just so much fun to be in. Why are we leaving it? Now we're spending the whole, last third of the movie somewhere else. Why don't we just stay in the jungle the whole time? You still imply that he's going to leave. He makes the choice to leave and put on the suit and walk upright and say goodbye to Kala, but it gets diverted, and he never actually ends up going to London. Seems like a simple thing, but that kind of made a huge impact. And I also remember, and this might have just been my own read on it, but I do remember, in the final movie, I think one of the strongest things about it is the character of Tarzan himself, because he's so visual. He's like perfect for animation, because yes, he speaks and he makes his noises, his animal noises and all that, but really the character is defined by his behavior, how he moves, the way he, curls the knuckles, and he's got that hunched shoulders, and he walks like a gorilla, and the expressions and his thinking, and that really heavy brow, all that stuff that Glenn Keane and his team brought so much to the animation of that character. But it's all visual, and it's all comes through the animation. So in the story phase, when we were just working with storyboards, Tarzan was the most boring character in the movie, because it was just our story sketches, and nothing against story sketches, but we're not animators. There's only so much you can get in a story sketch.
Right.
The other characters that talked a lot were coming forward in the story reels very well, because they had dialogue that was carrying them. So I think I do remember that being a struggle for a while, is that we just don't care about Tarzan. And then as Glenn started adding his animation, he started doing his animation tests, and there's that deep canvas test of him, surfing down the tree branches, which ended up in the movie. Then suddenly it was like, oh, whoa, oh my gosh, this is beyond what we expected we could do with this character. And then the character suddenly became the most interesting thing in the movie. So it's a testament to, to those animators and what they can do.
Right. Well, it takes an animator to be able to explain it like that.
Yeah.
It's the way and again, this is like, it's kind of bending my mind a little, because of course, like, it's another obvious thing, just the way that the animated him, like you said, like an ape, right? And then when he puts on the clothes and all of a sudden he's upright, there's a noticeable difference. It's all visual, you know what I mean? And so that's, wow, like, again, talking about taking things for granted, I think that's a great kind of point to make. I'm particularly fascinated because of the, listening to your conversation with Stanford, I'm fascinated by the Emperor's New Groove history. And to hear that you were part of the screening where they changed the whole outlook. Could you, again, we could make this a whole gush session. Like, we could talk for 2 hours about all this, but I do want to, I mean, what was that like? Jonny, he was actually part of that screen. If you wanted to explain to Jonny and explain to and explain it to me, like, how was that experience being part of that sea change in that movie?
Yeah, it was such a crazy time. The funny thing is, a movie going through a sea change like that now happens constantly at Disney, at all the other feature studios. Doing a big sort of reset or restart of a movie, so common. But when it happened in Emperor's New Groove, which was what, 98, I think it was, Kingdom of the Sun to Emperor's New Groove, it was unheard of. I mean, that had never really happened before. So I had just gotten off of Tarzan. It was like late summer, early fall of 98. And I wanted to go work on this other movie called Sweating Bullets, and it was a Western. And I thought I picked up that I might have a chance to be head of story on that movie. So I was like, I think I really want to go over there, because I would love to advance. I'd love to do some leadership roles and, expand. my role in the studio. But the studio said, "Oh, we need you to come board on this screening for Kingdom of the Sun. They're having a screening in a couple of weeks. We just need a couple extra hands to do some stuff." So okay, fine. So I boarded a song with a friend of mine, and then I kept trying to get off of this other movie, and they said, "No, we just need you to stay on Kingdom. We just need to stay on Kingdom." So they had the screening. Now, granted, Kingdom had been going for several years. In fact, it was going when I started in '95, before Tarzan had really started rolling. So, I mean, Kingdom had been going for a while. So they had the Kingdom of the Sun screening. We all went up to the story room, as we always do after screenings. We all sat around they made a big square out of a bunch of tables. And everybody sat around the table with the executives and the director and the producer. And then typically what happened is the executives start launching into the notes, and you have a big discussion about what works, what doesn't, what are you going to change for the next screening.
Yeah.
So we all sat down, they closed the door, and the executive said, "Thank you all for your hard work. We really want to say, we appreciate everything you've done. Now we'd like to ask you to leave because we need to talk with Roger and Mark, who are the directors." And we all were like, "Oh, okay, this is not normal." So we all stood up, filed out of the room, and then before you know it, Roger's movie Kingdom of the Sun was sort of on the chopping block. And so they tasked Roger with coming up with a streamlined, simpler version of Kingdom of the Sun, and then they tasked his co-director Mark Dindal with coming up with a totally different idea. Keep it Incas, keep it Peru, keep the main ideas, but completely rethink it. So there were these two camps, Roger Allers in one camp, Mark Dindal the other camp, and they had this little bake-off. So they each developed a new story outline, pitched it, and then the executives ended up going with Mark's, which was Emperor's New Groove, which became Emperor's New Groove. It was bizarre. It was so weird. And for me personally, it was awkward because I was on both teams. So each of the teams grabbed a little group of story artists so they could do drawings for their outline and then help brainstorm and that kind of thing. So I was doing drawings and sitting in the room brainstorming for both of them. So it was also very awkward because, it's just weird to be in the middle of these two, wonderful people. Like, you love both of them, but now it's this weird competition.
Like you're a kid in the middle of your parents' divorce.
I know. Yeah. It's so weird. And poor Roger, unfortunately lost the battle. And then Mark Dindal and the producer Randy Fulmer invited me to come on as head of story on Emperor's New Groove. And I was like, well, okay, I'll do that. And I'm really glad I did. Because with all due respect, Sweating Bullets became Home on the Range, the movie that I wanted to go work on. I think the movie is really fun, but boy, did that also go through a nightmare development. And if I had gone onto that movie, who knows what would have happened, and what I would have gotten stuck doing, and how I would have gotten chewed up and spit out by the process of that one. So I'm very happy and very fortunate that Mark and Randy offered me the spot on Groove.
Well, it's interesting you said that 95, because that was after Allers did like right after The Lion King, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
right onto Kingdom. Yeah.
And then again, no disrespect to any of that work. It's weird because Home on the Range, I like Home on the Range. I think it's clever. It's fun to watch. It's not like, I think a lot of people just think it's like supposed to be like classic, and it's not. It's a fun little one-off, right? And so, but it has this kind of disastrous kind of reputation. And then Emperor's New Groove, the way that everybody loves that one. So, and talks very reverently about it and just adores it. You know what I mean? And so it's weird. I don't know if Kingdom of the Sun had come out, if that would have been, who knows what the reception would have been. It's just interesting that we never know, how things are going to turn out. But
yeah,
just being able to be a part of Tarzan, and then right after that, Emperor's New Groove, you know what I mean? And then obviously we got kids or fans of animation here, but it, and then Brother Bear. I mean, was there any particular like story about Brother Bear that you feel like you haven't shared before, or any connection to that one?
I mean, I think what was interesting about Brother Bear is it was made in the Florida studio. That they used to have, when it was Disney MGM Studios, the theme park down in Orlando, they used to have a working animation studio connected to the, they had what they call, what everybody called the fishbowl, which was, it was part of the animation attraction where guests could actually look through glass down into a pit of animation desks and watch people actually flipping paper and drawing and making animation. And that was a theme park attraction. Started off as just that one room, and then as the years went on, they built an entire building connected to that. And then that Florida studio was the production facility for Mulan. They did a lot on Lion King. They did Lilo and Stitch. And then the decision was made for Brother Bear that was going to be made A to Z in the Florida studio. So then you would have LA and Florida making animated features simultaneously. So you really increase the output. The challenge was the Florida studio was all, as I said, was all production based. There was no pre-production experience there. So story development, storyboarding had never been done out there. All this on Lilo and on Mulan, all the story development, viz dev, storyboarding, all that stuff was done out in LA. And then the production moved to Florida to produce the movie. So they trained some people in Florida to do story, but then they had to annex a team out here in LA of more experienced story artists to help. I came on as head of story after a couple years of the movie's development. That one was also very tense because there was a big rivalry between California and Florida. Florida was like, the little brother who wanted to impress the older brother, their LA brother, and say, we know what we're doing, we can do it, and we're awesome, we're not going to be in your shadow anymore. Yeah. So they kind of had a chip on their shoulder, and the LA people were like, you don't know what you're doing. We've done this, these are people that have been doing story development and storyboarding for years and years and years. They're like, you guys don't know what you're doing. We do. Why aren't you listening to us? And then Florida was like, because we don't need to listen to you. We know what we're doing. So it's just like, and so then I came on as head of story in the middle of that, which was also like, oh my gosh, this was so tense. Eventually I moved out to Orlando for about a year and a half. They gradually cut loose the LA people, and we all were concentrated in Orlando. And then things got better because we were all together, and there was none of that like, oh, and sorry, in a quick tangent, the way we had meetings, it's funny in the era of Zoom to think that this was such a problem, but to have story meetings with LA and Florida, we video conferenced the story meetings. Wow. And that was really awkward. Really, nobody really knew how to do that back then because it was not normal. And then the problem was, as soon as you hit disconnect on the call, both sides were like, oh, man, I hate those LA people. and then the LA were like, those Florida people don't know what they're doing. And so it just fostered this, nobody, you were polite to each other on the video conference, and then you just spew about each other, and you never really connected with each other. So finally, when we were all in the same place, in Orlando, things got better. Anyways, another long story, but that one was a real challenge. Up to that point, that was the most difficult movie I had worked on. Wow. Between Tarzan and Groove, and Brother Bear took the prize on that one. That was really, really tough.
Just trying to find that happy work medium. That's interesting. Of all the things.
Exactly. Just like there's the creative challenges of like figuring out what's the story, who are the characters, all that stuff. And then, but in order to get to that, you had to just figure out how we're going to work together. Yeah. And then once we finally figure that out, then we can figure out all the juicy, meaty stuff. But yeah.
Okay.
A challenge.
Okay. Well, so again, the reason that I got addicted to you was because of Meet the Robinsons, right? It's hard to explain, and I'll tell you why the movie means so much to me, but I wanted to get kind of your insight on it. But like watching it like as just a cartoon separated from everything, just another Disney movie, it's different than hearing you talk about it. and then all of a sudden getting a different perspective on what it means, and having that perspective change, and having it, in my eyes, in my my being, having it become a completely different movie. So I want to talk about that. But how did you become attached to Meet the Robinsons? If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I did I did really have a dream to be a director. As much as I wanted to, initially be an animator when I was growing up, then I wanted to be, I got really interested in writing and storytelling and just filmmaking in general. And so ultimately what I wanted to do was be a director.
Yeah.
But I love being a story artist. I love had a story job. And after Emperor's New Groove, I told the studio, hey, I really enjoy doing Groove. I would love it if you could consider me as a director someday. Just not pushing for today, not pushing for any time, just like keep me in mind. And they said, great. We'd like you to do one more head of story before we really consider you. And so that was Brother Bear. So when I came back from Florida, moved back to LA, they handed me a script for this project called A Day with Wilbur Robinson, based on this book by William Joyce.
Yeah.
And said, okay, if you want to direct, why don't you take read through this script and see if it's something you might want to start developing. We're not going to promise you that you can direct it yet, but you can at least start developing it if you're interested. And I was immediately connected to it because it was the script about an orphan boy who was curious, wanted to get adopted, but was also curious about where he came from and who his birth mother was and why she gave him up. Yeah. And what the studio didn't know is that coincidentally I was adopted. I wasn't, different situation. I was adopted as an infant. I wasn't adopted as a 12-year-old like Lewis in the movie.
Yeah.
But ever since my parents told me very young that I was adopted. So I always had these questions in my head growing up of, who is my birth mother? Why did she give me up? All these same questions that this kid in the script was asking. And I was like, well, I have to do this movie. I mean, this was like perfect. And I went back and I told them, I said, you don't understand, and explained to them. And they were like, well, great. So we were off to the races and started developing the film. So there was completely a coincidence that I happened to, get that material in my hands, but it was like the best gift I could have been given.
Yeah. Well, you're looking at that, you're making your gradual climb, right? You're getting there, you're putting in the hard work, you're proving your mettle, you know what I mean? And you're getting there. So with Meet the Robinsons, my kids, two youngest kids got addicted to Roly Poly Oly when that was on Disney Channel, right? And so obviously the William Joyce-ity, I like to call it, it's like all the bubbles and it's such an immediately recognizable design. I mean, he's so idiosyncratic in that way, right? So we loved Roly Poly Oly, and then having Meet the Robinsons. Oh, this is Roly Poly Oly. It's the same, like you can tell. I mean, you're what was the name of the Carl, right? The robot. He's obviously very Roly Poly Oly. It seemed like to me. So it had that same kind of quality, and that's what kind of hooked us, is that way. But again, when I say I had a connection to Meet the Robinsons, I'm not an orphan. I wasn't adopted. So my connection is in that way. But I really value personal voice in any kind of film. Not just, you have the Allers, you have the Musker and Clements. They make these movies, and I don't know what their connection, if they have like a personal connection to mermaids or anything like that, or magic lamps, but hearing you talk and having that personal kind of attachment to that movie, it made it a completely different experience for me. And so watching it again after I'd heard, I can't remember how it came along, but how I heard your story about how you were an orphan and stuff like that, and you were adopted, and that's your emotional tie-in. But watching the movie again was like, it just felt so special because of that connection. And like I said, I don't know about the Muskers and Clements connection to the other movies, but knowing your connection to this movie, and it just felt so, there's like a melancholy to the movie, like an underlying, it's a joyous film, right? And there's a lot of comedy, a lot of humor, but there's just this feel of melancholy. Lewis is just, there's a scene where he's talking with the Angela Bassett, I can't remember her name, the character's name, but he's talking to her. What was that?
Mildred.
Mhm.
Mildred. So he's talking to her and he's like, my mother didn't want me. Nobody wants me. Right. And there's just so, and then he meets the Robinsons. It just immediately, like one of the notes that I had watching it again last night was just when the T-Rex attacks and they just immediately band together and they don't even really know this kid, but they're just so protective of him. Like, this is what family is. You know what I mean? They
Mhm.
protect each other through thick and thin. And that's through all the movie. And I don't know how to explain it. It's just, it feels so special. And I don't know if a lot of people know that about the movie and
Mhm.
your connection to it. Does that make sense? It exists on another plane now for me because of that connection that you had, and I can see it in all the characters and all the story
Mhm.
beats and just the tone of the movie. I mean, was that something that you really, other than your connection, was that something that you wanted to get across about what it feels like to be an adopted child, or any of that feeling?
Yeah, it was definitely. I mean, again, the specifics of my story differ from Lewis's story, but
Mhm.
the one thing I did say when I brought the script back and said I want to do this is I think we need to mine the emotional component a lot more, because it was a tiny bit in the beginning of the script and a tiny bit at the end. It was in there, but it was just hinted at in that script that they had written. And I said, we gotta really bring that to the forefront, and that needs to be the emotional
Yeah,
spine of the whole movie. Is this kid's? I kept kind of phrasing it as he wants to be wanted. This is a boy
yeah,
that wants to be wanted. Feels like he isn't wanted. Can't find anybody who does want him. Is about to give up hope on ever being wanted, and then finally finds the people that want him. Finally finds his place in the world.
yeah,
Um, and so we just kept, and everybody agreed with that, and that kind of in the story development, that really became, we all rallied around that idea and just said that's got to be the heart and soul of this movie is excuse me, is Lewis's his journey, that
yeah.
that emotional through line.
And wow, I can really feel that. I can really feel it. And to
That's
the very
awesome.
end, when he finds Bud and Lucille and how they nurture him, and they buy him basically his lab, right? And that's what they move into. It's all about making sure that he's loved, and that comes across so strongly. And I just wow, I'm wowed by that. So just
uh, I
thank you
really
for
appreciate that.
making it so personal. And just I just really think that a lot of our popular IPs and our popular entertainment, they're missing that personal bent.
Mm.
And so I just really appreciate that about the movie.
Well, I that really honored to hear you say that, Darren. Thank you so much. It really means a lot. Thank you.
Now you did some work, some voice work on the movie as well. Like we know you're a bowler hat guy, and by the way, awesome job as bowler hat guy. It's just phenomenal work.
It's perfect,
Was
Thank
perfect voice. Yeah.
was
you.
it always going to be you? Was there any other person you had in mind for that character, or were you always going to be the one to do that role?
No, we I mean, backing up, as I'm sure you all know, when we make these movies, you storyboard them and then you film the story. You shoot the storyboards and you make a story reel and you put temp dialogue, temp effects, temp music, and you kind of watch it as a like you workshop the movie before
Right.
you actually animate it. And we just do our own temp voices in the studio. We call it scratch, doing scratch voices. I was the scratch voice for Porter and Tarzan. I was a scratch voice for Pacha and Gru. Like we all just do scratch.
Okay.
So I just stepped into the scratch for Bowler Hat Guy. And we all did, voices. And great reception after we finally screened it, which it was a real honor to me. People really appreciated what I had done. But we started making a list of actors to cast it. But then, to my shock, the studio came back and said, "We'd actually like you just to do the voice." They appreciate they felt that it was the right thing to do. I never could have made that decision myself because I would have felt like an egomaniac doing that. But they were very kind and said, "Why don't you do it?" And so, wow, I got to do that. I
Who
never
was
would have, I
who was on
never,
that
that
list?
was never in my mind.
Yeah.
Which actors were on that list? Just if you don't mind saying.
I mean, I had Jim Carrey on there.
Of
I
course.
made my own list, and we just sort of started talking. I had Jim Carrey on there. Who else did I have on there? boy, I can't remember now. I can't remember now. I do remember Jim Carrey.
Well, you know what? It doesn't matter because they got the perfect voice.
Thanks. It was fun. It was really fun.
Could you just say they all hated me in Bowler Hat guy's voice? Could you?
Yeah. Let me take a little drink of water. They all hated me.
I gotta tell you, that line, it always cracks me up. I was in a meeting one time, and somebody in the meeting was saying, "Oh yeah, like some people, you feel like you're not appreciated." Like that part, Meet the Robinsons, where all the kids are like, "Oh yeah, like great, want to hang out?" Goob is like, they all hate. I'm not gonna do justice, but I just thought, wow, it's made an impact to more than just me.
Oh,
I like that.
That's awesome.
I've got to ask though. I want to move on to Winnie the Pooh, but I've got to ask, where did that Tom Selleck joke come up with? That the payoff to it is so funny. Well, the joke is funny, but then when you get Tom Selleck to actually voice,
right?
I mean, where did that come from? Whose idea was that?
That was a story. One of our story artists named Nathan Greno, who went on to direct Tangled, and was head of story on Bolt. Nathan worked on Brother Bear in Florida. He was one of the Florida story artists that was trained to do story, and then came out to LA, and he came on to Meet the Robinsons, and that was his. We gave him the assignment, introduce the family, and so he did all of the billions and billions of versions of Meeting the Robinsons sequence, but all the stuff of actually walking through the house and meeting all the relatives, and then it was his idea to do the little pep talk at the end, or like the pop quiz rather, as just a way to kind of, you just saw audience, you just met a lot of characters. We'll just give, like, there was kind of a practical reason for it too, because just to make sure the audience like remembers who everybody is. And then he threw in the Tom Selleck thing. I don't know why, just being silly, and we all thought it was hilarious, and kept it in. And
had you cast Tom Selleck by that point, or was that?
No, we hadn't. In fact, we had actually approached Tom Selleck. We were told he was not interested. So then we cast another actor. He came in, he recorded the whole role. We even started animating with that actor. And then I forget why, somebody said, shouldn't we, let's try, or I think what they realized was it wasn't perhaps the request had not gotten to Tom Selleck himself. Perhaps his people had stopped it before it got to him. And so somebody had said, let's try again, and let's make sure we get past his people to him, so that he and so he agreed to come in to the studio. He sat in the story room. I pitched him the movie, sort of explained him the joke, showed him the reels. And he said, yeah, I'll do that. That sounds great. He thought the joke was funny. Unfortunately, it's like fortunately and unfortunately. I'm so glad we got Tom Selleck. I feel bad the other actor had to be given the boot. But for the full circle of it all, it was good to get Tom Selleck in there, and he was lovely. He was just a great guy.
Yeah. So again, just brilliant joke. So again, we'll get to Robin Hood eventually. I want to the last thing I want, and obviously you did Monsters at Work, and it's we just started watching it, and so it's just great that it's still in that world. I like that you have the prequel, and then you have the main, but then this is like it takes place the day after, so that's great. You got to work with John Goodman, Billy Crystal, and it's such a nice idea. But like Winnie the Pooh, I just before we move on to Robin Hood, I want to. I tweeted that I was watching it the other night, and I'd always meant to watch Winnie the Pooh, and forgive me, I didn't realize that you directed it until just recently. I'm like, oh my gosh, like why haven't I seen after Meet the Robinsons, right? But like I'd always wanted to see it because the preview was just when the trailers came out, Winnie the Pooh is just like a warm blanket, like those characters, right? You want to hang out with them, and so I thought that was the perfect opportunity. Let's watch Winnie the Pooh finally, and let's get some more Steven Anderson goodness, right? What I wanted to commend you on with that, and I tweeted at you, is like this. It's such a lovely lovely movie. And I think do you think was it daunting taking on Winnie the Pooh and just having that legacy? I've got a lot of other questions, but was that daunting, like signing on and agreeing to take that as a project?
I think less about the legacy and more about how do we make this fresh for today's audiences, because Winnie the Pooh, the original Disney shorts, the three Honey Tree, Blustery Day, and Tigger 2,
Yeah.
um, are also lovely. Loved those shorts growing up. They're fantastic. We rewatched them and we thought, okay, it's really nice, but boy, things are kind of slow in the 100 Acre Wood, and which is charming.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want it any other way. But how can we bring it up to how can we make it something that an audience of today wants to watch without killing the spirit of it? Like, we don't want to make it SpongeBob, we don't want to make it Looney Tunes or I don't know, Ren and Stimpy or something.
Winnie the Pooh skateboarding or something like that.
Yeah, we don't want to like make it so contemporary that it's just off-putting. But how do we do that? But we still have to. We got to quicken the pace. We got to find more room for comedy.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to recast some of their voices just to get a little more of a contemporary feel to them, or contemporary pacing to the reads.
Yeah.
Or timing, the comedic timing of some actors. So I think that was the most daunting thing, and then music too. We wanted music in the movie because the original shorts have such great, Sherman Brothers songs that are connected to it. How do we channel the spirit of those wonderful songs, but make it feel something that people of today will want to listen to, but also not make it feel like, well, it's the rap version of Winnie the Pooh or something, something horrible like that. So all those things that was I think the biggest challenge was being true to it, but also trying to figure out when can we push the envelope a little bit.
Right. So was there, I think you talked about it, like the owl character and the rabbit character. Was that was who you pushed more to be more contemporary? And how did you do that?
Yeah, we brought in Craig Ferguson for Owl. At the time his late night show was he was in the thick of that show and his popularity. I always loved Craig Ferguson. I always thought he was hilarious, and he sort of has a kind of an anarchy to him that just thought is fantastic. Seemed like somebody who would be able to find sort of the lunacy inside the head of these very like, all the Winnie the Pooh characters are very simple, and I don't mean that in an insulting way, but there's also kind of, if you look at it, there's almost there's a little bit of a insanity to some of this. Like, when you really boil it down, it's like, is this a bunch of, are we is it, somebody once likened it to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Like, sitting down with the Pooh characters would sort of be like you being Nurse Ratched and talking with all the McMurphy and all the gang of the loonies and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. They're charming, but they're also kind of, there's a little bit of an insanity to that, and Craig Ferguson felt like he would get that. He would understand the absurdity to so many of these situations that these characters find themselves in, but know how to play it to where the characters aren't aware of it. Still have that very innocent and true response to all these things, to all these crazy situations that they're encountering. If that makes sense. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but yeah, I mean, he in particular felt like, okay, he's going to be able to bring a really fun edge to it.
Yeah. Well, a couple of, for me, huge compliments for that movie is that, number one, my kids sat and watched it. Like, in this day of like YouTube and TikTok and everything, it was like, first of all, the Winnie the Pooh should be short. It should be episodic because it, the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh, it feels like you're reading the books. And so I just think that it was a pitch perfect ode to those characters. I love that you stuck to the 2D animation instead of updating it, because that is very tied to the books. I like that you had the live action, like the stuff that again, it just felt very Winnie the Pooh, right? And it's funny because my wife, she was watching the Baxton song and she's like, has Owl always been like this? I thought he was always smart. And that caused us to pause, and we looked at the Owl characters like, oh no, Owl is like, he's puts on the air, it seems like, of being so smart and intelligent, but he's maybe not, as he's kind of scatterbrained, and he's not getting it, which just explains that song. So that it made that very clear, whereas we thought he had actually been a smart character. So I liked that. I don't know if that's what you're going for, but it felt very contemporary in that way, and it pointed up that comedy. The thing I want to say about the movie, other than that, and it being really lovely and kind of tonally perfect, as far as what I want from Winnie the Pooh, is like, this was the first Winnie the Pooh story that I laughed out loud at several moments. And usually Winnie the Pooh is like, oh, it gets a chuckle out of me and have a smile on my face and I feel really warm, silly old bear, that makes me feel all gooey, right? But some of the gags where Pooh launches Piglet into the bees, the hive, or when they're trying to figure out who's gonna go get the vaccine, and like Kango lifts up Roo and he's like, send the pig, I laughed out loud and I just thought that was so great. And having the Zooey Deschanel voice it just added so much. And I guess my other question is the Lopez's, Kristen Anderson Lopez and Robert, was that, I know they're huge now, but did you snag them before they got really big with Frozen?
Yeah. Bobby had already done Avenue Q, so he was pretty big, but they hadn't, as a duo, they hadn't really hit it big like they did with Frozen. They'd written a Finding Nemo musical for Disney World in Animal Kingdom, the Animal Kingdom park. There was a stage musical of Finding Nemo. So that was their first kind of duo, and John Lasseter had worked with them on that, so he knew who they were. Our music department suggested them as well, and we actually had a little bake-off with a couple other songwriters, and they won the bake-off. And then I remember the Frozen team asking us, what do you guys think of working with Bobby and Kristen on Pooh, and how was that, and did you like it, and do you recommend working with them again? So it was a big stepping stone for them.
That is incredible. I'm just I'll add to your credits, discoverer of the Lopez's. I'll just put that.
Thank you.
So, but again, very classically tied. I think that because we know Frozen, because we know Avenue Q, did they write Book of Mormon? Am I thinking of the right?
Oh yeah, actually, Bobby was in the the middle of writing that while we were doing Pooh. Yeah.
So they could have brought that energy, that kind of rambunctious kind of meta, but they didn't. Everybody seemed like they were just in tune with it. And again, just such a lovely movie. And thank you so much for that. It's already a new favorite, and so I really
appreciate that. Thank you. It was so much fun to work on.
Yeah, and you did I think it's everybody's kind of wish to have a take on Winnie the Pooh, and I just think, great job with that. So lucky. I want to, again, you're been such an inspiration animation wise. I want to move on to Robin Hood, because that's where we wanted to talk. And again, when Johnny and I settled on the 70s idea, I was like, well, if there's any Disney cartoon, it's Robin Hood that I want to talk about. And then talking to Rachel and Stanford, and I think I want to ask Steve if he wants to come on the podcast, and they're like, I think you should go for it, I think he'd be open to it. So I warmed up to that. But so, and again, it's just crazy that we're finally here talking after all this. But before we jump into Robin Hood, Johnny, did you have any particular questions for him on Winnie the Pooh or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of SpongeBob, and I know Tom Kenny is the voice of the rabbit. I'm also a big Monty Python fan, and John Cleese is the narrator. So what was it like working with Tom Kenny and John Cleese?
Well, Tom Kenny had also done a voice on Meet the Robinsons. So I loved working with him. He's so much fun to work with. He's so great with what you put in front of him, but he can ad-lib the crap out of anything that you give him. Like, again, he'll make what you put in front of him sing, but then if you tell him, can you just go off and do something, he goes, yeah, give me a minute. And then he would sit there and like spend, I don't know, 30 seconds to a minute writing some notes on his script page, and you go, okay, I'm ready. And then you roll and he just starts going. So I really love working with actors that can improv for animation. I think it's really helpful, and gets them to really own their characters, and you know, make it themselves, really make it their own. So we were thinking about who we could bring in for Rabbit, and I just thought, what about Tom Kenny? And everybody seemed to like that idea and brought him in. And he's just super great. He's insane. He's sort of the SpongeBob energy in person, but just so professional. And again, will do anything that you ask. He'll just, and he brings so much to the table. He's great. John Cleese was also fantastic. I would say there's only 2 times I've really gotten starstruck. The first was working with Danny Elfman on the music of Meet the Robinsons. That was like, it took a while for me to feel like this was normal. And then the other was John Cleese. Such a Monty Python fan. Fawlty Towers is one of my favorite things ever made. Fish Called Wanda. I mean, gosh, that guy is a genius. And I just remember sitting in the lobby of our hotel room in London. We flew over there to record him, and it was the morning of the session, and it was just like, John Cleese is going to read our dialogue. Like, we wrote this stuff, and he's going to read what we wrote.
Yeah,
it's not right. This can't be happening. But he was wonderful. We showed him a bunch of clips from the film. Most of it was rough animation, and he was laughing and like suggesting ideas, and it was so professional, so cooperative. And it couldn't have gone better. He was great. He was lovely.
Yeah.
Well,
you
it was
also
a real dream.
Yeah, you looking at the credits, you also work with Andreas Deja, right? You worked with Eric Goldberg. Two of my, I mean, they're so connected to Disney, and they're so influential.
Yeah.
How, again, we'll get to Robin Hood, but how is it to be able to, I mean, how do you work with them? Do you tell them, like, do you give them notes, or do you just let them, because they're doing character designs, things like that, do you just let them go? I mean, how is that working with people who are actual, I'm sure they're idols of yours, I mean, they're idols of mine, I mean, how is that working with people that you idolize, Danny Elfman and John Cleese and all that?
Yeah. I mean, with Eric and Andreas, they had obviously seen, when we started animation, they'd already obviously seen a few screenings, because at that point we'd screened it in story reels a few times. They got what we were doing. They are such students of Disney anyways, that they know those characters inside and out. I mean, with Andreas too, he was doing Tigger, and Tigger was basically created by Milt Kahl, who was Andreas's like hero.
Yeah.
So for Andreas, he got to step into the shoes of his hero and do his hero's character. So there really wasn't much we had to do to tell them. Like, we didn't really have to tell them much of anything.
Yeah.
They're both super smart, so talented. Yeah, every now and then there was a little adjustment we might make. We see a first pass, we're like, oh, what about this, or what about that, or could we try this, or tiny adjustments. But and it's the same with somebody like, well, with all those, with people, Danny Elfman and John Cleese, they're so smart, they're so good at what they do, you don't really have to tell them much of anything. You sort of just let them go and do their thing, and 95% of the time they hit the bullseye, and the other 5% is not because they did anything wrong. It's just like, oh, what if we do a little fine tuning here? Tweaks. Or when you think about, what if we just hit that accent in the music a little bit differently, or whatever. Yeah, tiny tweaks. That's the great thing. I've many directors have said, or maybe not many directors, but it's sort of an adage of directing is that what is it, 90% of directing is casting.
Yeah.
And you get the right people, you don't really have to do much of anything.
Right.
You just get out of their way and let them shine. And so when you get people like that,
Yeah.
it's like, I don't want to say nothing's easy, but it certainly makes it easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have one final question before we get to Robin Hood. Most of my kids, they are artists and they have aspirations to, work in the industry, in some aspect. Mostly they want to be like cartoonists or animators like yourself. What advice would you give someone who has the, hopes and dreams to be in that field?
Well, for animation, I definitely the main piece of advice I give people is get comfortable with collaborating. As artists, it's very easy to just sort of sit at your desk or sit at your Cintiq these days and just do your own thing and kind of, now post it online and you just sort of your own entity, and that's fantastic and that's great. But nothing in animation is done alone. It's all done with huge amounts of people collaborating nonstop every day. And so a lot of times, depending on one's threshold for that, to tolerate that kind of scenario, some people don't do as well because they don't know how to collaborate. They don't know how to get out of their own head, and they don't know how to accept feedback and give feedback and do it in a very positive and constructive way. And those that can understand that and can fit into that will thrive. So I always tell people that first and foremost, if you want to get into animation, get comfortable with collaboration. Get comfortable sharing your work, showing it to people, accepting feedback, learn how to give feedback constructively, and be open to building something in a team. And that just makes everybody else's work that much better. That'll just make, it just elevates everybody, that kind of collaborative spirit. So that's what I would encourage people to get comfortable with.
And again, just gushing a little bit more, you can feel that in your work. All the things that we've talked about, Steve, I think we can feel that kind of idea, and that those ideals come through. And so I think that's what makes, you've got a voice and we can hear it, and we appreciate that. And so again, talking about Robin Hood, just again tying it in with you, is that I gave you some homework, right? But I figured that you'd be okay with it because talking to Stanford, you'd already done some research, right? You got a book coming out called Disney in Between. If you want to, and again, speaking of Winnie the Pooh, like Bernie Mattinson, who worked on those first three, and he's been connected to Disney like since Lady and the Tramp. And what do I have here? Like, he worked on Sleeping Beauty, so how can I not love him? Yeah. I mean, directing Mickey's Christmas Carol, directing The Great Mouse Detective, which you love, obviously. Being a story supervisor for your Winnie the Pooh, right? You were able. I mean, this book. If you want to tell us a little bit about that, and then if you want to go right into your research about Robin Hood and where that came from, explain to us where that your Mattinson connection and what your book is about, and when we can expect that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So the book Disney in Between is about the 20 years after Walt Disney's death. So it's 66 to 86. And it covers the enormous transition that the Walt Disney Studios went through after losing Walt Disney. Kind of, not really knowing how to find that creative, that they didn't have that person out front leading them, that creative mind like Walt. So how do we continue making Disney movies without Walt Disney? And then that takes us all the way up through, like I said, 86, which is like the first 2 years into Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg and their leadership and the way they revived the whole company, but particularly animation and live action films. On the one hand, as I said earlier, this time period is my childhood. This is the Disney I grew up with. So I just love these movies. Some of them, again, not the sexiest time in Disney history. Some of the movies leave a lot to be desired, but boy, do they make me happy. I see them and I just remember the feeling as a kid. This is new Disney. I didn't care what it was. It was just exciting to me. So from just my own perspective, I wanted to know more about the time period. And I realized at one point, wait a minute, I'm working alongside, at least in animation, I'm working alongside all the people that were there when this happened. Ron and John and Glenn Keane and Bernie and Chris Buck and Mike Gabriel and Mike Giamo and all these people. I know them. I could sit down and talk with them. I thought, well, why don't I do that? And why don't I start figuring out what's the story that I want to tell about that time period? So I started with Bernie, and then just continued talking with folks, found some live action folks to talk to as well.
Wow.
And kind of built this book about those 20 years, an incredible time of change, of an incredible time of fear. It's really a lesson on how fear is the greatest enemy of creativity. For at least the first half of that 20 years, the leadership of Disney was just petrified to do anything different. Because they were so, and rightly so, they loved Walt and they didn't want to do anything to tarnish his legacy. So they didn't take any chances. They didn't take any risks. And the irony is that Walt was the biggest risk taker, one of the biggest risk takers that Hollywood ever saw. The reason why the company existed is because of huge risks that Walt took. Was one of the most forward-thinking people. But that was the thing they were the most petrified of doing, was thinking forward, of thinking differently. And so they got themselves into a rut, and the Disney name started losing its value with audiences. And then Hollywood changed simultaneously. There was the movie brats of the 70s, the Scorseseans and the Coppolas and the De Palmas and then the Lucases and Spielbergs. And then into the 80s, it was blockbusters. It was Jaws and Star Wars. It was essentially, many people have said it, Star Wars, Raiders, E.T., those are Disney movies. They were just done with a contemporary spin, with contemporary special effects, and aimed at a bit more of a mature audience. And mature is not really the right word, but they weren't the G movies, they were the PG movies. They weren't, kids felt cool seeing them. But those are the kind of movies that Walt made. And so then they sort of got beaten at their own game by other people. So sorry, I'm rambling a bit but it's a fascinating time to me, and it's ultimately really just about the concept of change and how, does that cliche, the only constant in life is change. There's always going to be something that disrupts society, that disrupts culture, that disrupts creativity. We're in the middle of it right now. We've got AI. We've got, our world was disrupted a few years ago with COVID, and our world has totally changed now. We've got so many cultural shifts that are going on. I feel like we've been in transition for quite a few years. Our world's been shifting, and it's still shifting in all ways. So it's a basic human thing. We hate change. We don't like change. We resist change. But the only way things are going to move forward is if we embrace change. And that was sort of the story of Disney during that time period.
It's a
doing the research on Disney, I did a project a little while back going through all their, I called it Disney Animated 50, where I took watched all the movies from Snow White to Tangled and try to navigate their history. It's funny watching the little movements, like, when World War II hit, and then they, Disney, Walt, like, bankrupting the studio because he was trying to push what animation was, right?
Yeah.
And then bankrupting, like, Pinocchio and Fantasia, and then having Bambi be a relatively smart one, have that small one, and have it make more money and stuff like that. But then World War II hit. You have the package films where they lost their way and they couldn't figure it out, especially when the war ended. And then they came roaring back with Cinderella. And then Walt had all, like, 101 Dalmatians, had Peter Pan, was right back in it. And then when he died, I believe it was 101 Dalmatians was his last, like, project that he worked on, right? His major one.
Jungle Book, I think.
Okay, no, Jungle Book. No,
yeah,
you're right. Jungle Book was the one. Right. Okay. So after that, and again, they lost their way, like you said. I mean, they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to take risks. They didn't know how to work without Walt. And then all the way, again, with your book, all the way through 86, when you started the uprising of, Musker and Clemens, and you get Little Mermaid, and then that hits, and then they lose their way again after the Renaissance, and then Tangled hits again. And it's just fascinating watching these and trying to see them navigate their way. And yeah, like you talked about, I love that they're not the greatest compared, like the 70s, the late 60s, early 80s output. It's not like the greatest comparatively, say, right? But it just makes you so happy. Yeah. And I think Robin Hood is the one, it's the sweet spot. Like it's the familiar, but it hits in a way that the charm of it kind of wins you over. So from your book and your research, just tell us a little bit about, or as much as you want, about the production history of Robin Hood and how it came to be, if you could do that for us.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because so a lot of people point to Fox and the Hound, which was 81, as really being sort of representing the change that was going on in Disney animation. And kind of the crossroads, like a threshold that was about to be crossed, that was going to change everything. So Fox and the Hound was the last movie that had the remaining 9 old men on it. It had all the Bluth folks. It had Cal Arts folks, all the young people that were coming up, and many of them through Cal Arts, the school out here in California, sort of sponsored by Disney. All of those were together. They would never be together again after that. 9 old men were gone. Frank and Ollie retired. Wooly was out. Bluth left. And that was the Cal Arts folks and the young people that were sort of in their group that went ahead with Black Cauldron. Robin Hood actually starts that transition, though, because Robin Hood was the first movie that had any new young talent on the film. Around 1970, the studio, they had come off of Jungle Book was a big hit, so they knew that animation was still lucrative. They wanted to keep doing animation, but people were retiring. Some of the older folks, some of the 9 old men had retired. Unfortunately, some of the old guard were passing away, and they realized, if we want to continue to do this, we are going to have to pass on this craft of Disney animation. Otherwise, it's going to die with the Franks and Ollies and Woolies and Milk Calls and all that, and then it's going to be gone. So around 1970, they brought in their first outside trainee. It was a man named Ted Kiersey, who ended up being an effects artist. The second trainee that came in 1971 was named Dale Bear, who's an animator, and he's on Robin Hood. So this is the second trainee from the outside worked on Robin Hood, the first movie that had any new blood on it. Don Bluth is also on this film. So Don Bluth had worked on Sleeping Beauty, and I think a little bit on Sword in the Stone, and then had left the studio for a while, and then came back. I think it was 70 or 71. He came back to the studio and became an animator. Bernie Mattinson also became an animator on Robin Hood. Bernie had been doing in-betweening and cleanup for a number of years, like you said, on Lady and the Tramp and Dalmatians and Sleeping Beauty. Bernie and Don Bluth and two other people were part of an internal training program that Disney started doing at the time. So they were recruiting people from outside, but they also started training their own within. A lot of the animators' assistants, they started training to become full-fledged animators. And so Bernie and Don Bluth were two of those people. So this is beginning the seeds of the change that was going to be happening, certainly up until Bluth left. But you're getting a whole new generation of people coming in on Robin Hood that were going to make a big impact on the studio. Not yet CalArts. Nobody from CalArts was there yet. Really wasn't until Rescuers that you see the CalArts presence. And Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2 in 74, you start seeing more of the Bluth, like Gary Goldman, Don Bluth's, and John Pomeroy were on Tigger 2. Don Bluth became a directing animator on Rescuers, so he already started advancing just one movie later, basically a short and a movie later. So Robin Hood was really very pivotal because it was ushering in this new generation of artists that were going to pick up that torch from the Nine Old Men and all the other artists that surrounded the Nine Old Men and those in Walt's time, and continue the art of Disney animation.
Yeah, wow, that's fascinating. Even though the Disney output in the 70s didn't hit quite as big as the movie Bratz were hitting, right? There's still that like we talked about before, there's a sea change coming, and people are gonna, what a fascinating history of all these people that became so huge in animation, and just seeing where they come from and how they built to it. So with Robin Hood, again, talking warm blankets, this movie is my wife's favorite Disney movie, and a lot of it has to do with, she just thinks Robin Hood is so cute. And there's that whole thing. But what is your, and then I kind of wanted to talk about the thing that it's notorious for now before we talk about our feelings. But what was your history? And then John, I'll ask you, what is your history with Robin Hood, Steve? How did you first see it? Was it a revival that your parents took you to? And how did you feel when you saw it for the first time?
Yeah, it's funny because I saw so many of the reissues when I was a kid, but for some reason I missed Robin Hood. It was actually released. It's probably I guess it's the first Disney movie that was released in my lifetime, the first new one. And somehow, well, I was 3 when it came out, so I don't think I was going to movies when I was 3. And then we never saw a re-release. So I only knew it through a little story audio tape of the story of Robin Hood that I listened to constantly. And of course, I knew the characters through storybooks and things like that. It wasn't until, it must have been, I think it was around 1984 on the Disney Channel in the summer. They had like a summer movie festival or something like that, they called it. And it was the world television premiere or cable premiere of Robin Hood, Sword in the Stone, and Alice in Wonderland. Ironically, none of which I'd ever seen. I hadn't caught reissues of any of those 3 movies. So for me, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm finally getting to see these movies. And it was the time of the VCR. So I recorded them all on tape. And to me, there was nothing more magical than being able to pause and frame by frame through animation. I thought my head was going to explode. And so I did that with all those movies. Robin Hood more so than the others. The animation in Robin Hood, the character animation in Robin Hood, I think is just really stunning and continues to be some of the best ever done. And the appeal of the characters, the acting, the expressions, I just loved it, and I just devoured it. And from then on, I was, super fan of it.
Yeah. Johnny, what about you? What was your first time watching Robin Hood?
Well, actually, I want to say from start to finish last night.
Really?
I catch, glimpses here and there, and I remember seeing scenes like as a kid, but never the whole thing all at one time. So yeah, my experience with that is relatively new.
Interesting. And what did you think watching it for the first time all the way through?
Well, I enjoyed it. I had fun. I did have one critique, and that was just I had a hard time with Sheriff Nottingham's the Pat Boutram voice. I'm used to seeing him as Chief or as Lou from the Rescuers, and I don't think that character and voice matched. That was the one that kept going like, why did they pick that voice for that character? For me, it didn't work. But other than that, I really liked it. I really enjoyed it.
Well, it's interesting because, like I said, Steve, like the '70s output was it. Those movies were what soured me on Disney because I just didn't. Maybe I didn't like the look of them when I was a kid, or just. And I thought that's what Disney was. So again, watching Little Mermaid, I'm like, oh, this is Disney. And then you go back, Snow White is Disney, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella. These it was mind blowing. And again, we're talking like changes and like dips in quality. And you look at their output. I'm for some reason I'm not a big Jungle Book fan. It's never worked for me. I think my mom always says, well, I think you don't like it because you used to run around in your diaper all the time, just like Mowgli. It's like, well, I don't want to be connected to that. So, but I don't know. And then the Aristocats, I'm not a huge fan of. There's I just some of the anime, it just looks dirty. There's the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh, obviously, which, like we talked about, just was a warm kind of experience. And I'm not huge on the Rescuers. I know that you and Stanford connected because you loved, and Rachel was really happy for it. I thought that was really funny because I've ribbed Stanford before on the Rescuers. It's kind of like that's something we do anyway. But Robin Hood, it was the one of when I finally decided to go back and go through and watch them all the way through and finally, well, let's see if it's just me. Robin Hood was the one that I didn't mind. You know what I mean? It was like, and I think it comes down, and Winnie the Pooh, obviously, but it's the characters. The notes that I have here is these characters are so charming, right? And that's what does it. And obviously we'll have some topics about this, but the main thing, and see if you agree with this, Steve. I know you wanted to talk about Wolfgang Reitherman, but kids, it's just come out, it seems like within the last few years, that oh my gosh, look how Disney is just recycling their animation, right? Look how in the phony Queen of England song, it's like, oh, there's the Snow White dance that they papered over, like they've rotoscoped over there. Look, oh, there's a little bit of the Jungle Book, there's a little bit of the Aristocats. And I think kids today are snarky about it. They look at it and go, well, the movie's not that good because look at how they're just copying stuff, they're cheapening out stuff like that, right? Which is interesting. I don't know. I just don't like the idea of people just attaching snarkiness onto stuff because it makes them feel cool. And if we're going to get down to it, this was not the first. Robin Hood is notorious for it, but it's not the first or the last movie to copy stuff. The notes that I have here, Citizen Kane, like repurposed footage from Son of Kong, like Ichabod and Mr. Toad, like reused the Jungle Book, 101 Dalmatians, like it appears in Sword in the Stone, like Jungle Book used Sword in the Stone. I think they did a short Goliath 2, and the elephants that shows up in Jungle Book, right?
Right. Yeah.
You look at afterwards, you've got I think Ridley Scott used some of the Shining footage for Blade Runner. There's a shot of a Klingon bird of prey exploding in Star Trek The Undiscovered Country, and they reused that exact same shot for Star Trek Generations. Michael Bay, Transformers Dark of the Moon, he just he took footage from the island and just added robots into it. Like he didn't change anything. So
Wow.
this thing of like recycling footage, it's nothing new. You know what I mean? I think, and again, people kind of attach themselves to that snarkiness. I think it makes them feel important because they can do that. But I think the misconception is for Robin Hood, they used it. Obviously, they were in a traditional period. They didn't have the huge budgets. I think like I said, the people say, I'm not sure if it's false or not, and I'll ask you what you think about that they used it just to save money and time, right? What is your opinion on the recycled footage and that whole kind of controversy with the movie and how it connects to Reitherman?
I mean, I find it more kind of as a fun curiosity as opposed to something that I get really angry about.
Yeah.
And this was done in a time before VHS, before DVD. I mean, nobody back then ever thought anybody would be able to pause and compare. Like at the most, it would get shown when it was released, and then it might get re-released another 7 years later. But they never expected that to be an issue, and I'm sure nobody back then noticed that they did that because
Right.
you couldn't do that. You couldn't compare. You really had no way of holding up Snow White next to Robin Hood and go, oh look, they took the Snow White's dance with the dwarfs. So I don't know. I don't I understand how it can be seen as being very crass, and looked at easy to look down one's nose at that. Um, but I kind of understand it. I can empathize with Wooly. Now, according to some people that I've talked to, um, there were people were pretty angry about it at the time when they were making the movie, that Wooly wanted to do that. In particular, I know I did hear that Milt Kahl was like, I mean, he was already kind of a spitfire and was really known for being a cranky, bitter man. But he just sort of tore into Wooly about how can you do that, and you can't be reusing animation, and but Wooly said this is what we're doing, and they did it. Um, um, so it definitely caused a stir within the halls of Disney back then. Um, yeah, I don't know. I guess I, I get it, and like I said, I see it more as just an interesting curiosity as opposed to an insult. But I
Yeah,
understand why people get mad about it.
right. Well, you're talking about nostalgia, right? And people just using, weaponizing it.
Yeah,
You're right. That's a fascinating point. Nobody had a way to, and now in the days of comparing and contrasting and things, you can put those things up against you. Oh, isn't it funny how they did that? When you're in the thick of it, I think it's going back to us talking about taking animation for granted. As long as you're caught up in the story, like you don't
yeah,
notice that stuff. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
And so it's just, I just think, to me, watching it again and knowing that that's there, it just seemed like a throwback and kind of an homage to the old Disney classics. It's just,
Mhm.
you intrinsically, even if you don't know that's from Snow White, you recognize it, I think, in your heart, like, oh, well, this is familiar to me, and I think it works because of that. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
um I just think that Robin Hood is just, you're in love with all the characters. I mean, obviously, it's strange because if you look at the Robin Hood story, I personally think that it's either Errol Flynn or it's Disney that nailed Robin Hood. It's so weird thinking that a cartoon Fox really gets to the heart of the Robin Hood stories. And again, they're repurposing things from all the other Robin Hood stories. You know what I mean? They're just taking things that are, it just seems like they're adapting all the familiar Robin Hood stories, right? I mean, if you're like the arrow shooting through it, I think it was from like an older, what was it called? The Bandit of Sherwood Forest.
Mm.
Prince John's room, some of the shots are exactly the same as that movie.
Oh,
There's arrows shot through windows and stuff like that. That was from Rogues of Sherwood Forest. Even the part where at the beginning you see Robin and Little John walking, and there's a tree bridge that they walk across, and they kind of like each beckon each other across. If you look at the Robin Hood stories, that's how they met. They were trying to cross a bridge, I believe, and they're, well, who's going to go over? Well, let's fight with quarterstaffs, right? So that's a
right.
nod to that. Or you have him fighting with a chair, or you have the archery contest, which comes from the Curtiz Adventures of Robin Hood, right? It just feels, it encompasses everything about Robin Hood. That's what I really appreciated about it, and I'm appreciating more and more
Hmm.
about the movie. It just feels like it's an homage to that, and it's an adaptation, and it's a retelling of those things. So to me, that's why I think this is a definitive Robin Hood movie, because yeah, it's anthropomorphic animals in human clothes, right? But it gets the tone of those stories and gets those specific story beats, and I think that's what makes it work as a Robin Hood adaptation.
Hmm.
You agree with that, Steve? I mean, would you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that, but you're right. It's sort of it's almost like it's like taking the greatest hits of of different different tellings of the legend of Robin Hood, and kind of repackaging it in the Disney way.
Mhm.
That's really interesting. I agree with you about the characters. I think I think the designs are so appealing. I think the way they're animated is incredible. I think the voice casting was great,
Mm.
even though I know, and I have comments about some of the other voice, like the Pat Buttram, Sheriff of Nottingham, Johnny that you're talking about. Um, but for the most part, I think the voices are. I mean, at least of the four, Robin Hood, Little John, Sir Hiss, and Prince John, I would say those four characters I think work so well. All of the scenes with them in any combination of the four of them together, they play off each other so well. And it really is, it's a character piece. And it's interesting because one of the things that I'd heard about Wooly, some of the younger folks coming in to the studio at this time, kind of lamented the fact that the studio's movies were taking this turn. Like once you go from Jungle Book to Aristocats to Robin Hood, they were becoming, first of all, the really rich production values of the Disney movies were kind of a thing of the past. They were much more stripped down. They were doing they weren't inking cells by hand anymore. They were doing the Xerox. So you know, Darin, you made the comment about the looks kind of dirty, like you see the animators' rough drawings, and sometimes you see their construction lines and you know, extra lines that they didn't erase are on screen. So there was a lack of production value, and a lot of people felt like Wooly was sacrificing production value as well as story in a way, in favor of basically character and comedy. Make these things fun, make them funny. If there's a funny sequence that we come up with that interrupts the story, that doesn't necessarily further the story, but it's still fun and entertaining, put it in, which was very counter to sort of the way Walt worked. You know, Walt would throw out sequences if they stopped the movement of the story. Right. This was a little more counterintuitive to that. And as a result, I remember John Musker in particular had sort of given the analysis that the animators started becoming the most important thing in the studio, because the movies became more about character comedy, and scenes of just like in Robin Hood has it, scenes of just two characters interacting for, you know, a couple minutes, Prince John and Sir Hiss just doing stuff together. That's an animator's dream, because they're mostly medium shots. You know, there's no complicated, you don't have to have walks, you know, animated characters walking or doing any of the really difficult, like animating things in perspective. It's all torso, hands, arms, face, all the juicy stuff, and just personality. So that was sort of how the balance tipped, and you can really feel it. It's particularly Aristocats and Robin Hood. You can really feel it. The story is just really an excuse for these characters to be doing stuff that's funny, if that makes sense. So I just kind of found that interesting, because that was really, and it was an answer to, or it was Wooly's response to budget and time issues, and which is why you get the reuse. I think for me, the other thing with, and this is not a criticism of Wooly Reitherman, but definitely his taste sometimes leaned a little more to, I don't know, I guess here we're going to the Pat Buttram note, Johnny, almost like these hillbilly characters. He really loved he really loved the Pat Buttrams and the like the swamp, like you said, the swamp folks and the rescuers, and it's all the characters in Fox and the Hound, and the two dogs and Aristocats, you know, that are chasing Edgar by the windmill, on the motorcycle. Those are both like, they came from Mayberry, you know. It's like they're that one of them is Pat Buttram, the other one is George Lindsay, who's Goober on the Andy Griffith Show. He loved that stuff for some reason, and it extended to the music choices a lot of times, and that's Robin Hood has that. Some of the things I don't think work as well in the movie are those bits. I think when it does focus on the characters and they're just performing, I'm just transfixed. But some of the other stuff, Wooly's taste in what passed for entertainment in Willie's mind sometimes was a little questionable, then doesn't always fit with the vibe of the movie. I mean, I always felt like, as much as I enjoyed the Robin Hood movie, if you could took the same characters, the same designs, the same animation, voices, and just found a story that had a little bit deeper stakes, just still had the fun comedy adventure, you still want that. But what if it just had what if Prince John was just a little bit more of a threat and the Sheriff of Nottingham was a buffoon? But what if he did actually have, like, but he could actually mean business sometimes, and you felt the danger and you felt those stakes. Wow, it could have been a really, really cool movie. I don't know. That's just my opinion. I mean, who knows? Maybe I don't know. That's just I always wondered about that, because I love the designs, I love the characters. If they were in a bit of a deeper movie, what would that have been like?
Right, Jonny, you're nodding. What do you think about that, and your thoughts on the movie from that perspective?
Yeah, I can see that. I did want to say this. You guys were talking about how they recycled the animation or the backgrounds and stuff. I feel like they also recycled the actors. You know, you hear a lot of the same voices kind of show up in these movies, and so much so that I expected to hear Sterling Holloway's voice at some point. I was like, "Isn't he in this movie? Like, shouldn't he be the snake? Or when's he gonna show up? Where is he?" Because you hear him so often, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, it worked for the most part. These actors were great. Voice actors did a great job. So I'm not going to fault them for it. It still worked and it's still good, but they did recycle a lot of the same actors.
Yeah.
Well, the nice thing about having Phil Harris is literally Baloo, right? I mean, it's Baloo.
Yeah.
But the nice thing about is it you don't have to do any writing. You don't have to do any hard work. It's like, oh, it's Baloo. I love his voice. It makes me feel warm and cuddly and fuzzy on the inside. Like I love it. Like he's Little John. Like he's my friend too. You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think that familiarity works. Steve, it's interesting though. There's I don't know. We could do some deep dives and find some stuff. I just think that it's the kind of movie, like you're right. It goes so far. There's not and why I think it's more interesting conversation we had about your history with animation, Steve, and Robin Hood's kind of the shorter end of that, but it's still the appreciation comes through. I just think that Robin Hood, as much as I like it only does so much, and it does it great. It doesn't go deeper, it doesn't break any rules, it's not groundbreaking, it's comfort. I think it looks great. I don't see any of the, like in the Aristocats or the villain and rescuers, look so dirty, and it's like, oh, like why, how could they not clean this up? Like so I noticed that stuff. I don't find any of the dirt and the grime in this one. I think it looks very clean. I'm not sure if watching on Disney Plus the other night, if they cleaned it up and did any like restoration stuff on it, but I thought it was very crisp. And like you talked about the medium shots, it looked like it needed to look. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
It there's only so much we can say about Robin Hood other than I like it. The characters are great. It's a good fun hour and 20 minutes to spend your time. There's nothing, like you said, it could have gone to Sleeping Beauty or Pinocchio levels, but it didn't. I mean, they didn't have maybe the cojones, I guess you want to call it, to go that far. But I think as a character piece, like you said, it works, and it's just it's perfect for what it is, even though it doesn't. You know what I mean? There's the difference between a good movie and a great movie is a great movie will go above and beyond and try to be more than what it's given. This just works with what it's given, and I think it's great. And I don't have any complaints other than the only thing that really dates it for me is the George Brun score. Sometimes when it does like the jazzier kind of notes, like even the love song, the Phony Prince of England, they're timeless to me. But there are moments where I'm like, oh, this is obviously a 70s movie because of the way that it sounds. But that's really the only thing that dates it. I think this is mostly a timeless film. Steve, was there anything else that you wanted to add about Robin Hood? Anything else you wanted to?
I think that kind of hits my main points. Yeah, I agree with you though. I mean, it is a really fun time. It's just a fun movie. Yeah, I sometimes I look at movies and I think, well, what if you did that? That's kind of where my comments before were, because I do remember watching the Errol Flynn Robin Hood on TV a lot growing up, and and just loving the sort of that, just that swashbuckling adventure feel to that movie, and thinking, oh, I'd love to see that in animation. And what if you did it with these characters? But again, that's a what if. The movie they did make, I feel like, is extremely entertaining.
Yeah.
And again, you just cannot beat the animation and the character design. Just, I think the characters are the standout. It's a character piece.
Yeah.
And it's really well done in that respect.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're a storyteller, you're a filmmaker, you're naturally going to think, what could I have done, like if I was a part of this, or what would I have? But again, when you just look at it and you're like, well, it is what it is, right? I mean, and it's, the artistry is still there, even though it's not quite up to the standard. Some people disagree with me, some people love this more than Snow White. I tweeted that I was watching this, and I got over like 200 responses on Twitter, like, people love this movie.
Yeah.
And it's just that warm, cuddly feeling, and that is not something to kick your heels at. It's not something to kind of brush off. That it means something to people, and I think in that decade of transition, to be able to have that movie that means so much to a lot of people, I think that's really impressive. That's what I take away from the movie.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree.
But yeah, I mean, unless anybody else has anything to say about Robin Hood, that's Robin Hood. You know, it's a great fun time with the movies. I wanted to bring this in at the very end. Jonny asked a question about his kids wanting to be animators, and when I told my kids that I was going to have the guy that directed Meet the Robinsons on, they kind of stared at me like they couldn't believe it. And so they've been asking questions. They're like, how did you get to know him and stuff like this? And so again, it's all been a whirlwind. But I asked them, because they were asking so many questions. I asked them, I have 4 kids, and I asked each of them to give me a question to ask you. So if, with your permission, would you be willing to answer my kids' questions?
Sure, I would be honored.
All right. So my oldest, Tanner, his question was, because he's connected, he was, again, roly poly-oly. He was the first kid in our family to really get addicted to that. He says, I know that it was based on the same author. Meet the Robinsons is based on the same author's roly poly-oly. And I know that it's about family and stuff like that. But did you base any of the movie Robinson Family on members of your family? Was there any of that was integrated into the movie?
No. They either came from the book or came from just us, shooting ideas around to try to come up with the craziest people we could think of. I think most of them are from the book.
Right.
We tried to put as much in the book as we could. So at least, so you could, if one wanted to, one could sit with the book and the movie and say, oh yeah, look, that's from the book, and they use that from the book, and
Okay.
So,
well, still, what's nice about the movie is it feels it's a barrage, right? But it feels like every one of these people. You've got somebody in your family just like this. There's at least one character, and I think that, again, brilliant stuff, brilliant personal stuff.
Good. Thank you.
My daughter Savannah, she asked, how did you choose the songs to use in the movie? Shoot, it's escaped me. The song at the very end that plays, what's that?
Little Wonders.
Little Wonders by Rob Thomas, right? That song has affected us in a way that my wife put together like a family reel of all the home videos that we've made, and she set it to Little Wonders.
Oh, neat.
But how did you, and that's Savannah's favorite song, but how did you go about choosing some of those songs, like the Rufus Wainwright, or I know They Might Be Giants, were Jonny and I Are Big, They Might Be Giants, but you didn't use that song, is not in the movie, but All American Rejects. How did you get to use those songs, and what was the idea behind any of those songs?
Well, at the time, the head of our music department was a man named Chris Montan, and he had his assistant was Tom McDougall. Tom McDougall runs the music department now at Feature Animation. And what they would do with all filmmakers, anytime there was a request or a filmmaker wanted to do songs in their movie, they would put together lists of names of artists that are, Disney friendly, or have expressed interest in working at Disney, or, just would fit the part. So Rufus, Jamie Cullum, who was the singing voice of Frankie the Frog, Rob Thomas, and All American Rejects were all on their list. So we met with all those artists and kind of talked them through what we were looking for, and they came back with these great songs. From what I remember with Rob Thomas, he had, gosh, how did that go? I believe he was kind of writing that song in the moment. We talked him through what we wanted for the end credits, and he was like, oh, I kind of have something that I've already been working on. And he sent us the demo, and it was Little Wonders. We're like, yeah, that's perfect. So that was almost too easy. But I was really proud of the music in the film, because we got really unique artists that could do the music. I think it's all original, which I appreciated. There was a while there where some of our leadership was trying to get us to do, like, put a Green Day song in when they arrive at the future, Welcome to Paradise, the Green Day song, put that when they arrive in the future, and use Queen's Somebody to Love at the beginning when he's trying to get adopted. And they wanted to do all this needle drop music, which is nothing wrong with, but I was just like, no, come on, this is Disney. We need original music. Anyways, I'm going off on a tangent, but it's just so proud that it's all original music, and that we got just such an eclectic band of people to do the music for us. And Danny Elfman, my gosh, again, I was just beside myself.
Right. Well, just a little bit of, like, Henry Jackman, working with him. I'm a huge Hans Zimmer fan, so you having that connection there is it was blowing my mind as well. So again, thank you for the original music. I think that really, it adds to that voice. It's not DreamWorks, it's Disney.
Exactly. That's
So thank you for that. Okay, so Spencer, my second youngest, that Once Upon a Studio short, which we've watched maybe dozens of times by now. His question is, how do you feel having your Meet the Robinsons characters be in Once Upon a Studio and be part of that 100-year legacy?
It's super cool. And the fact that they're not just like shoved in the background. I mean, they're prominently featured, was really cool. To be blunt and honest, the company tends to not really do much with the movie and kind of ignores it and marginalizes it. So to see it represented in something like that was really, really special, really cool.
Good. And again, that was my biggest point. I'm like, characters, Meet the Robinsons. There's Lucille. I see Lucille.
Yeah.
So it's
great.
One
shot, Lewis and Wilbur are just like bang right there.
Yeah, I'm like, just friends. I'm like, oh, they're hanging out still. That's great. You know what I mean? It's it warms the heart. I'm so glad that those characters were in there. And I think I even tweeted at you, look at even Lucille's in here. Look at the love for Lucille, because some people are like, I love that character. So great. I'm so glad you're part of that legacy, and you should be proud of that. And then my youngest, I had to cut. He was like, he couldn't figure out a question. He's got his own stuff going on, but the question he came up with is, do you read Roly Poly Oly to your kids?
Oh, my son is 24, so I don't read much to him at all.
Right.
But he watched the show when it was on. We watched that show. I don't think I read any Roly Poly Oly books. I read Day with Wilbur Robinson to him while we were making it, and I used to tell him about the characters, and there's we created so much backstory for a lot of the characters that never made it in the movie, so sometimes I would tell him the backstories of the characters, and so I would tell him the story of that movie. But yeah, he was a Roly Poly Oly fan for sure. The show.
Good. Well, it's good to know that William Joyce has made an impact. We were getting along so well on Twitter that I was like, I'm gonna ask him. And I told my family.
So glad you did.
Yeah, the day of that I asked you, I was like, told my wife, told my daughter, I was like, I think I'm gonna ask him. What do you think? And my daughter was like, just write a note and I'll tell you what I think. And so I wrote what I tweeted to you, and I showed that to my daughter, and she goes, yep. And she pressed the button and sent it to you. And so I was like, well, I guess I'm asking him. And again, you've been so gracious, and just seeing whenever, I can't tell you the day, how bright it makes my day to see when you like a tweet, some stupid silly thought that I have, and see, oh, Steven Anderson liked your tweet. I was like, my day's made. I can't tell you that. And again, when I called Johnny, I was like, you're not going to believe this. Do you like Meet the Robinsons? He goes, yeah, my family watches it a lot, right? I was like, I got the director of Meet the Robinsons to show up on Nostalgia. And he's like, wow. So yeah, it's been such an honor. Johnny, do you want to gush at him for anything? I'm doing all the gushing.
Well, I just want to know, is there going to be a Meet the Robinsons 2? Like, what's next for you?
I don't know. I mean, before we were done with the first one, I sort of sketched out a 2 and a 3.
Oh,
but I've yet to have the opportunity to pitch that. So who knows? We'll see. Maybe, or like a Disney Plus series or something.
I'll start a Kickstarter right now to make that happen.
Okay,
and,
great.
Love all those characters. Love the work that you've done. And again, I appreciate so much that you've been a part of that legacy that's been a part of so many people's childhoods and just made an impact. And I can't thank you enough for showing up on our little podcast and having this chat with us. And it's like you talking about being starstruck with John Cleese. It's like me being starstruck with you. It's like, and then it just settles into a groove, and it's like, this is great. Yeah. It's like been friends forever. So
yeah. Oh, it's been an honor. I'm so glad that you both invited me to be with you on this program, and I hope we can do it again. I'd love to.
So how can people, like, you tweet stuff with your like little sketches that you put out, or how can people find you on social media and you know, all that stuff? How do we get to know more of Steve Anderson?
Yeah. So Instagram and the platform formerly known as Twitter, they're both at Steve Hat Guy. So like bowler hat guy, but instead of bowler, it's Steve, all one word, Steve Hat Guy. And you can find me there.
Okay. Again, Steve, thank you so much. It's been such an honor. I know that you say it's an honor for you showing up on here, but you know, yeah, we're all a mutual appreciation society.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Yeah, it was a real fun time. I had a blast. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Okay, we'll talk to you again soon.
Alrighty.